Welcome to the Boys Don't Cry podcast. I'm your host, Dexter J. Nyuurnibe.
You're feeling the same things the same way, 'cause I've got it for you.
This podcast is one part of a multidisciplinary art project exploring the topics of masculinity and mental health. We invited two people doing great work in the world of mental health to sit down and have a candid conversation about the topic.
I'm Verena Rizg. I am a nurse practitioner by profession, so I'm a clinician. I am also a singer, songwriter, spoken word poet. Much of my life and my life outside of my job and much of the work inside of my job revolves around an empathetic, holistic approach to healing. I do that medically all day at work, but I also attempt to do the same thing with my art.
My name's Tyler Simmons. I'm a peer support worker at Langhouse, and I'm a filmmaker and public speaker. I go around to different schools and organizations, different companies, and talk about mental health, talk about different coping strategies and different ways that we can take care of our minds.
There are many buzzwords and issues within the mental health conversation that are unclear and often confusing. The goal of this podcast is to shed light on these challenging topics. To open this discussion, we start with Tyler explaining his initial understanding of masculinity as a boy and how this understanding has developed over time.
Growing up, we're taught a lot of toxic things. I myself, even when it came to relationships, it was taught to me oh, the man does this, the woman does this. A lot of that would be oh, you tell your woman how she can dress. You are in control of your woman. And even that language, I started to realize as I got older.
You adopted.
I adopted that. It was just this constant thing of trying to control people. It wasn't just in relationships, it was friendships. I had to make sure that I wouldn't find myself in vulnerable situations where I could show my emotions. I had to be the one that seemed to have it together. And it was all these different things, movies, the media, everything. And I realized that in movies and stuff like that, they make it look really good. They make it look like that's how
It's healthy.
Yeah, it's healthy. But when it comes to real life, that from my experience and from the experiences that I see other men go through, it just brings a lot of pain for you and a lot of pain for the people around you. We need to look at that the way that I looked at that and think, okay, I was taught these things my entire life, but it's time for me to really take the right type of control now. Not the control over other people, the control over what's going on in here, and figure out, are these things the right things? Or do I need to change these? And I was it's obvious that I need to change these.
As we settle into this conversation, we hit on one of the biggest buzzwords in the mental health discussion: toxic masculinity. This term is often met with contempt, and many are unclear about what it even means. In the upcoming segment, Verena and Tyler address this term and dispel some common misconceptions.
I define toxic masculinity as something that encourages us to be a specific way, tells us to not be vulnerable, and tells us that being vulnerable isn't strength. That strength is the stereotypical idea of not showing emotions, the whole boys will be boys mentality, and not really taking the feelings of others into consideration, putting our feelings before everybody else's.
I completely agree. I feel like toxic masculinity is, in essence, the result of significant lack of empathy and emotional intelligence. Because what ends up happening when people have such a lack of emotional intelligence and emotional literacy is this constant perception that whatever you're feeling is anger. Right? So if I don't have the emotional vocabulary to identify what I'm feeling, I don't know if I'm hurt, if I'm sad, if I'm disappointed. So for a lot of men, that translates into anger.
Usually it's masking something deeper, like a sadness, and a lot of men don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to show that sadness, because a lot of us grew up, some of us grew up not being allowed to, or just feeling shame about that. Yeah.
Jeff Pereira, who I reference all the time when it comes to work around masculinity, he's a friend of mine based out of Toronto, and this is his cup of tea, working around masculinity. He talks a lot about empathy as like muscles, and so we invest a lot of, effort into developing the empathy muscles of our women and our girls. And then we have boys who are raised and become men who have never, like if you think of empathy as muscles and you think of them as a gym, they're showing up in their 20s and they've never worked out a day in their lives.
Yeah. And I think it's important to remember that this is not like it's not like we're not saying there's something wrong like with you as a human, because I've got people come up to me and say like, oh, are you saying that it's wrong to be a man? It's not wrong to be a man. It's wrong to be a shitty human.
Exactly.
Yeah, like that's wrong. Exactly. So that's all that it is. It's me being like, no, we've been taught that this is strength, but that's not strength. That's weak. Hurting people and feeling like that makes you more powerful. That's messed up. That's not how you want to live. It's a better way to live, a more healthy way where you can make the people around you happier. You will be happier and you'll feel stronger. Like this is like us men want to feel strong. So this is how we feel strong.
As a man, a defining trait we are taught to seek is strength. But sometimes strength isn't as definitive as the pounds on a set of weights. Tyler explains.
Be yourself and figure out things within yourself that you don't like and working on those things and just being vulnerable and not having this pride that's in the way, like, oh no, I'm not going to have to deal with this. Actually looking at that thing within you that you don't really like so much and thinking, you know what, I'm going to work on this because I want to be better. I think since I started doing that, that's when I felt my strongest. When I started looking at the things that I've been doing wrong and thinking about them and thinking, do I want to keep doing this? And then if I don't, I'm changing and working on things. And I'm still working on things. It's a process, but life is a process. And to me, that's real, true strength.
So I think it's twofold. The vulnerability that you speak of, and the courage to lean into these conversations and forgive ourselves.
Yeah.
Because as Brene Brown talks about so much Shame is I am bad versus guilt is I did bad.
Yeah.
And oftentimes when we can't forgive someone else, I'm struggling with forgiving myself as well for shame that I may carry. So strength is moving from shame and shaming ourselves and or other people to leaning into these conversations with ourselves first, because I can't build bridges between myself and other people if I don't build those bridges within myself.
Yeah.
Examples of this type of strength are all around us. In this next section, Verena provides a powerful example of what strength and struggle can look like.
But when I worked at the prison, there was a young brother who had taken someone's life in broad daylight and acted in his mind recklessly as a young person, and took the life of another person who was from the same background as him. And I was seeing this person for like a medical issue, but I always assess mental health needs when I'm doing like a medical exam. And it turned into this conversation about how he couldn't accept forgiveness because the mother of the person whose life he took forgave him and was praying for him. But this young man was saying, I don't want her forgiveness. But he didn't want her forgiveness because he couldn't forgive himself. Toxic masculinity doesn't always take form or shape in intimate partner violence. We see remnants of it all across our society and in everyday life. And that sounds like an extreme example, but it changed my life. And that example taught me of grace, and it taught me of forgiveness and healing. Because that was an example, a real life example of someone who forgave when it is humanly the hardest possible to forgive.
Yeah.
And though that forgiveness was there, someone who struggled so much with his perception of masculinity and his perception of self and the shame within himself, he struggled so hard to accept that forgiveness because he was so crippled with his own shame.
So, now that we have an idea of the health issues that face us, how as a society can we build each other up? Verena explains.
And something else that we deal with in regards to toxic masculinity, which we talk about all the time, is this need for public shaming and this tendency, this new age tendency to cancel people.
Yeah.
So instead of leading into these difficult conversations, men are hearing about other men who are being outed for their toxic behaviors and or attitudes. And so some men, instead of being forthcoming with the shame that they carry around things that they could have done better or things that they regret, they're hiding even more. So it actually builds and translates into more aggression because they're so scared of being outed.
Yeah.
For those conversations, because we're not a society right now that leans into those conversations and helps promote healing.
Yeah.
We're a society it's too easy to cancel people. It's very easy to cancel people, but that's not good enough.
Even when I see it, I'm like I cringe because I'm like, this is not gonna get the guys that I know who are pretty toxic. It's not gonna get them to talk. It's just going to get them to move far away from this topic, and you can't really change people by attacking them.
No, it's this cycle of shame, right? And
Yeah.
shame begets shame, begets shame, begets shame, and it becomes this bigger monster, right?
As Verena mentioned earlier on, often these issues start with each individual working on themselves. Here is some advice from both Verena and Tyler on how they work on themselves.
I ask this of my patients, I ask this of my friends, and I ask this of myself often. And the question is, what do you look like when you're well? What kinds of things are you doing when you're well? So I know the things that I do when I'm well. I pray, I sing, I dance, I write, I'm outdoors. Those are the things I do when I'm well. So I know when I'm not well. That's like my meter. So my recommendation to everyone I know and everyone listening is get to know yourself and have that gauge so you know when am I not myself and when am I the best version of myself. And I'd encourage you to talk to the people in your life about that. Because I briefed the closest people to me know to ask me, V, are you working out? Are you praying? Are you writing? Are you outdoors? They know. And I've kind of told them that and to hold me accountable. And that's also their gauge to know when I'm not well, and I'm not saying it because I hide when I'm unwell really well. And in regards to, for me, references, if anyone wants to kind of learn more about toxic masculinity, what it may look like, I'd really recommend you listen to Jeff Pereira from Toronto. He has an episode on the Awoken Words podcast, which is one of the best podcast episodes I've ever listened to. And like it's a game changer. So look him up, Jeff Pereira. He does a lot of really incredible work. You could look him up on all social media, Twitter, Instagram. And Brene Brown. The work of Brene Brown is life-changing. She has a TED Talk called The Gift or The Power of Vulnerability. And it's my favorite TED Talk. I watch it a few times a year. And she has a book called The Gifts of Imperfection, which I would highly recommend to everyone. And those are my top 3. And I pray, but that may not be for everyone, but it's my thing.
My most effective mental health practices would be a lot of meditation. Meditation helps me a lot. Just having that time to be still, and I look at it as getting to know myself better. And also just spending time with people that really love you and care about you is really super important, because they can remind you that they can remind you of those things that you forget about when you're like depressed. When I'm depressed, I feel like I'm not good at anything. I feel like I haven't done anything great in the world. But keeping those people that really love you around you, they will point those things out to you and be like, no, you do this, you do that. Like, stop being so hard on yourself. And that helps me get through a lot. Also, I'm everybody has their own thing, but I definitely have been receiving a lot of help for many years with therapy. And I think it's really important to just have that person there in front of you who usually will just ask questions, and then you'll say things and you'll realize you already had the answer. And for me, that's been really empowering, and it's helped me through a lot, because it's not me going in, these people telling me, oh, you have to do this, or you're supposed to be living this way. They're just asking me questions, and I'm realizing that I already know the answer. But being in a depression or going through a tough time, it's really hard to remember that we have a lot of these things already within us.
This podcast was produced by BZLY. If you'd like to see more content related to our Boys Don't Cry project, please visit our Instagram at THEBZLY. Many thanks to Verena and Tyler for their words. You can find them on Instagram at VerenaRizg and at TYLERSIMMONDS. You can find me on Instagram at NYUURNIBE. Special thanks to artists Elko and Johan Black for providing the theme music for this project. Thanks for listening.
Cause your feelings never lie, but you can't feel so you don't try. What should you believe in? Don't know the true beginning of freedom. Throw you away in the process of healing. Wondering if life has meaning. Cause right now it feels like